Hi there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Afternoon Tea and Truth Biscuits. Today, I'm really excited to be able to welcome here my guest, Laura Edelson, who is a PhD candidate in the computer science department at NYU. And she's doing really interesting work, developing methods for analyzing online misinformation spread and inauthentic activity by actors on Facebook, and she made headlines several times in recent years over the kind of research that she's been doing, as well as really important findings that she's been revealing to us about just how much engagement falsehood gets on Facebook, for instance. So I think she also has a really interesting background, and these episodes are very much for us to just get to know people as well as finding out about their important work and interesting revelations. So I'm going to ask Laura to say hi and just tell us a little bit about you, because you've had an interesting trajectory. I believe you started out in the
I started out as a software engineer.
Yes, exactly. In the world of software engineering, I think with Palantir, which some people will have seen in the news, and people will have varying views of Palantir, I'm sure. But I'm fascinated to hear about your journey of how you got into got to this point of wanting to do this kind of work. Do you mind telling us a little?
Not at all. So yeah, I worked as a software engineer in the tech industry for many years. I had a career for almost 15 years, and I worked primarily in areas around finance and specifically the stock market. So even before I worked at Palantir, I worked at companies that made data for the stock market. And it's funny to say make data, but it's very much what we did. Is we built the data flows that move really large volumes of financial transactions. And there's all sorts of really interesting, frankly, just math problems in there about how do you move those large volumes of data very, very fast, right? Because milliseconds are money. And there's all sorts of interesting problems around data compression, around how you can do things as efficiently as possible. There's fascinating problems about how you evaluate small financial shifts over large portfolios, again, as efficiently as possible, because real-time function evaluation is a problem. And it's all of it is really, really interesting math. And if you're someone like me, that's great. And then you pull back and you look up and you're like, what was going on? What are people using my work for? And it's all kind of shocking.
Right. So what shocked you the most? Was there a particular way that your work was being used that you thought, you stepped back and you were like, okay, I have to do something here?
I think I was I think that a lot of people who work in the finance industry, I just couldn't believe the wreckage of the housing collapse. And it was just something that I looked at back. It's something that was really wrought by the finance industry on, the economy of many countries, something that had such pretty horrible effects on many people's lives. And I just thought, this isn't great. And that's actually the thing that first prompted me to move to just try to get out of the real-time finance business. And I went to Palantir and still working in finance, but over sort of different time scales. And there my work was much more around applications of machine learning, and didn't necessarily, again, love all the societal impacts of that. But it did make me think, one, I do love what I do, but I worry deeply about the use that all this math is being put to, And I want to better understand it, and I want to better understand what we should be doing with these kinds of tools and skills. And that is why I do this.
That's wonderful. It sounds like such a natural, development when you put it in those terms. I think a lot of people would have been quite surprised at hearing you once worked at Palantir. But absolutely, when you put it in that kind of sense of like the social impacts that data has, and how we can improve these, and make sure that we are using data responsibly, and creating responsible ethical tech. This is absolutely such an exciting area to be in and to move into. Tell us a little bit more about your actual PhD, like what you're exploring specifically.
So my PhD is in computer science. I specifically work on problems of misinformation, online harms, through the lens of cybersecurity. So we think of this as a cybersecurity problem. So we try to think about how we can better understand this problem so that we can start working on mitigations. And because we're making the biscuits, what kind of cookie do you have?
I'm really excited about my truth biscuits today. One of my neighbors made it for me.
Oh, those are cute.
I think they were intended for her partner because they're kind of Valentine's Day cookies, but apparently they turned out wrong, which is crazy because they're amazing and they're so tasty and they're covered in sparkly stuff. So anyway, I'm fine. I'll be her early Valentine. And yes, so I'm enjoying these today, and I got my regular tea. What are your truth biscuits today?
Dare maple creams.
Oh, wow, that's good.
They're very, very good. I never had them before, and my mother-in-law gave me a box. Mm-hmm. And they are delicious. And like about a week ago, I got down to 2, and I'm like, okay, I have to stop eating these. I have to save them for my tea and cookie date with Emma. So
glad you did. It can't be, afternoon tea and truth biscuits without the biscuits. I actually saw your little dog pop up earlier, so I'm wondering if he or she wanted some cookies. Probably not. There must be.
Probably.
So yeah, I mean, I'm really fascinated with the Cybersecurity for Democracy project that you're working on there at NYU, and this ad observatory that has been so central in your work. Can you tell me a little bit about about that project and how it's been organized, what you're trying to do with that, and how you're trying to do it, first of all?
Yeah, so we know that there are several manifestations of online harms in like public content on social media. There's a lot of problems in ads that range from, honestly, garden variety consumer fraud that has been a problem on the internet, since it's been the internet, to things that are like really far out there, like political mis and disinformation. Vaccine misinformation is another example, although that often ties back to consumer fraud as well. Yeah. And so what I try to do is I think we're very much in terms of grappling with these problems of online harms, we're very much still in the accurately describe the problem. Can we fully understand, right, how a consumer fraud scam that works on Facebook ads, can we like fully describe that life cycle? So we can fully describe that life cycle of like recruiting people into your scam, and then how you like eventually take their money. Like, is it via credit cards, or do you get them to go buy gift cards? Like, how does this? If you like fully understand how those scams operate, that's how you start to disrupt them.
Yes.
So, and like misinformation is not actually very different than that, surprisingly enough. And I think that's kind of the phase we're at. Is we have really been just trying to fully monitor some of these manifestations of online harms. And honestly, I'm really hoping this is something we can start doing, in 2022 and 2024, is start to figure out, like, can we get better at screening for deceitful ads, misinformation ploys that are running through organic content as well. And, hopefully maybe we can start identifying these things earlier, getting them taken down earlier, and sort of blunt the damage.
Yeah. So what's the best way to do that? Isn't that something that Facebook should be doing themselves? Or, what's the role of researchers supposed to be, do you think, in your view on this?
That's a great question, right? I think there's a couple of things that are going on here. And again, this is why this is honestly not that different. I really don't think this problem is that different from like spam and email. And when we were figuring out how do you deal with spam, yes, email providers have a role to play in implementing solutions, but no one email provider can do this by themselves. Social media is a little bit closer to a monoculture. There are far fewer big social media companies than there were ever email providers. But the thing is that misinformation does not live on only one platform, and there is a very big problem with cross-platform misinformation. For example, one of the biggest problems that we have right now is misinformation on YouTube videos that are spread and go viral on Facebook. That's really difficult for either platform to really capture and understand because it's a cross-platform problem. Yeah. And this is why understanding it is just not something that any one platform even has, a view on. And also, frankly, they just don't have, this is why we have independent research. There's a lot of, I would call it misaligned incentives, where I think that it's difficult to tell Facebook, look, you have a problem with deceitful and misleading advertisers when advertisers are their customers. Yeah. That's, I think, a very difficult line for them to thread. They're a for-profit company, So I think this is, again, where independent research has a really important role to play.
Yes, absolutely. And this, in recent months, has really kind of led to a bit of a clash for you and Facebook. It came to blows in quite a spectacular way. Can you tell me, because why was your project, there's loads of people who are researching, content and how it spreads online and, ads and so on. And, what made your research special in the sense that, why was it controversial? Why did it get taken down? And what happened exactly with this?
This is tough. So what Facebook says is that they shut down our Facebook accounts that we use to get data directly from Facebook via some of their tools for researchers, like the political ad library, like CrowdTangle. They shut down our access to those things because of a separate project that we run called Ad Observer. So Ad Observer is a browser extension that anyone can install. You can go to adobserver.org right now and you can download it, install it to your browser. And what that will do is whenever you are on Facebook or YouTube, any ads that you're shown will anonymously be collected and they will be sent back to my servers. They won't be associated with you in any way. That's not really the point. The point is that you can contribute ads you're shown back to a common research pool. And then we take those ads, we identify the ones that are political, and we share those publicly that, those political ads. So Facebook says that this violates their terms of service, and they say that because this violates their terms of service, that they have terminated my Facebook account and the Facebook account of some other people associated with the project.
Amazing. And this is entirely consensual, of course, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Getting people to volunteer to help your research in a very clear way. And
to be really clear, we only ever collect ads. We don't collect your posts. We don't collect your friends' posts. We don't collect comments. We don't collect anything but ads. So
what advantage does it give you to get this kind of data rather than the kind of data?
Great question. So there's two. I actually really want to give Facebook credit for something. Okay. Facebook's ad transparency is better than, is the best in the business. It is better than any other digital platform, bar none. That said, it still falls short of what we actually need in several meaningful ways. One, Facebook doesn't actually share like ad targeting data. And one of the things we know is that there's particularly certain categories of ad targeting that are disproportionately used by deceitful and misleading advertisers. So particularly behavioral and interest-based targeting, I think those categories are just a little more prone to abuse. And so it is actually really important if you're trying to do what we're trying to do and, build, better understand which ads are more likely to be, to promote misinformation, which ads are more likely to be risky to users. It is actually very important to be able to see targeting data. So that's one piece. And when users are shown ads, they're also given access to a targeting explanation of why they're being shown that ad. So that data is actually tremendously helpful to us. The other thing, and this is something that's maybe is a little harder to explain, is one of the things that we are really interested in that we actually published a paper on late last year was trying to understand so Facebook only makes their political ads transparent through their political ad library, but that's not the only regulation that they have for political ads. They restrict, for example, if you're in the United States, and you want to run if you want to run a political ad in the United States, you have to be inside the US. For obvious reasons, a Russian or a Chinese or even an Australian person or company can't run a political ad in the United States. And that's a sensible restriction. But in order to actually implement that restriction and the other things that they have, like vetting that the name that an advertiser puts on their disclosure string is accurate. In order to actually implement all those restrictions well, they have to actually be able to identify all the political ads. Yeah. So in order to answer this question of how good is Facebook at identifying political ads? You need to be able to capture not just what they say is a political ad, but what they say isn't a political ad, so that you can see where is this level set? And you also want to be able to understand okay, well, where is this level set? And then also how good are they at enforcing that border? Without being able to see the ads that they haven't classified as political, you can't answer either of those questions. So, and I realize these are very, yeah.
Won't they? They'll fudge around it and try to find ways to be political, but without being political ads. Is that the case? Have you seen
exactly. That? Absolutely. And right, there's, all of this, I understand sort of why all of this is happening. The thing is that, we in the research community, these are really foundational questions. What is a political ad? How, and how accurate is any platform at enforcing whatever definition it comes up with? Yeah. And, if we're going to sort of do anything else like build models to detect political ads or build up models to detect hate speech, you need to just understand how good is the data you're getting out of platforms in the first place. So it's these kinds of really basic foundational questions that we need in order to build the other stuff.
Yes, I mean, I've been really critical of this kind of tendency for, academics to be essentially dependent on the platforms giving them a selection of, posts or material or whatever it might be that's disinformation. And, we can't rely on a profit-making company for our sample. I mean, it's just fundamentally flawed research if that's the case, So trying to find new ways of sampling that are more representative and accurate is crucial, isn't it?
It's a really hard conflict of interest, I think, where we all, in any other field, if you were to say, hey, the business you're studying, they're your only source of truth for data about that thing, and you have no external validation of that data. Everyone would understand that that's deeply problematic. But in sort of the internet research world, I think we're all, that's been the sort of the state of play for so long that we've all sort of gotten used to it. But there are clearly problems with this model.
So how do we change things? I know you've been writing a lot about this. You have a fantastic sounding new article out, which is talking about a standard for universal digital ad transparency. And I know you gave evidence as well to Congress. Congratulations, by the way. I mean, can you tell us a little bit, like, how do we solve the problem of this disinformation black box?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really important to note that, I really do think this is a solvable problem. I think sometimes platforms and other sort of people in the doom and gloom industry, they like to paint this as like, well, this is just people. People are just bad, and this is just what people do. But this wasn't a problem. People have been lying to each other for thousands and thousands of years, but this sort of fracturing that we're seeing in our society coming from this was not a problem we had 10 years ago. This is something that has been growing and growing, and that means it is like a tackleable problem. So that's the first thing. And then the question we have to ask ourselves is like, well, how are we going to do that? And unfortunately, in science, the answer is data. We're not going to come up with a vaccine until we've sequenced the DNA of the virus. And I think that's the phase we're at now. And that is why I really think the next most important thing that we can all be fighting for is, unfortunately, government mandated transparency of data by the platforms. I think I at least had been very, very hopeful that these self-regulatory, transparency mechanisms would work. But I think certainly what my own experience has taught the community, and unfortunately what other folks have gone through as well, I'm very fortunate, right? I have really excellent pro bono legal representation that has allowed me to keep working even under these kinds of legal threats. There's other researchers like Algorithm Watch in Europe, for example, who simply had to, close up shop. And I think that's a real loss. So I think that's why we're at the point where we just need regulation requiring transparency of particularly ads, which is why I put out that technical standard to show an implementation of how it can be done. But I think we probably also need requirements for other kinds of transparency around public data, and honestly, a safe harbor law protecting researchers like me and like others who do this work from these sort of just silly legal threats that would never actually work in practice. But platforms have a lot more money for lawyers than researchers do, so they can be effective even if they don't have legal merit. And that's where an actual safe harbor law, I think, could be really helpful.
Definitely. I'm seeing there's a few comments coming in and questions in the chat, which is great. And I want to thank our audience. And just, if you're enjoying the show, please subscribe and do leave, questions. I'll try and come to some of those in a second. But I just wanted to say, Laura, so does this present any risks? You're talking about a safe harbor law, some kind of, we need to enable access. Well, obviously, I was involved with the, revelations over Cambridge Analytica, and, that involved, researchers at Cambridge. So, our privacy laws that we have and, safe harbor kind of laws going to really protect people from violations of their rights? Do you think, we have enough in place to enable, to make sure that we can enable all researchers without, prejudice or bias, while, protecting people's rights on the platforms?
This is a great question and really important. I'd say two things. One, in part, this concern and the thing you said about making sure that all researchers have access to this data, this is a big part of why I personally focus more on identifying data sets that could be made public, that have no private data of any kind. And I think that there are quite a few data sets like that could be curated that would be, really important and helpful for all researchers and also journalists. Just to call out, I think journalism and journalists have done more to increase public awareness of what is happening on platforms than any other category of actor. And I think transparency that leaves out journalists is really short-sighted. And public transparency, I think, can really be a real help for journalists and frankly also the public. So that's sort of why I think that like the foundation of any transparency approach has to start with data that can safely be made available to the public. Obviously, ads fall into this category, but there are other categories of organic content that is already, very, very public, like content from influencers, content from businesses and organizations, content from government officials that would be really, really helpful for research and is already public. We just need to make it accessible. Yeah. So with that as a foundation, moving on to the next thing of, how can we, but obviously not all problems can be studied with public data only. And that's why I think there are some really great privacy protections that are built into a proposal that's in the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act in the US around basically NSF mediated but not controlled access to sensitive data for researchers via a clean room. So this is a proposal that would basically allow the NSF to approve research projects from vetted researchers who would then go to platforms, and the platforms would have to allow researchers to access that data through a clean room where they could answer whatever questions they had, take away their conclusions, but not the underlying data. And what I think is really important, what is built into that law, is safeguards, where if researchers don't follow all these procedures to protect data, that they're subject to penalty, and those penalties are pretty serious. And again, I think that's appropriate because we are talking about private data in that case. And also similarly baked into the safe harbor law are provisions that state that it only applies for researchers who are accessing public data, right? It doesn't apply, it doesn't give researchers carte blanche to go collect a whole bunch of private data. And also that it doesn't apply if researchers aren't following best practices for data handling. It doesn't apply if they're not working in the in the public good. So I think those kinds of safeguards do need to be built into to any proposal that comes out. And for the most part, I think that people are really trained to mind those privacy issues.
Yeah, I think the only issues I think it may raise still might be things like, differences across different countries where there may not be physically enough protections available from government interference or something like that within some institutions in some parts of the world. And there being a tension with that, with, wanting to enable research in places around the world where you obviously need some equality around internationally of people being able to research their own countries and their from their perspective. So I think these things are going to be tough, and who decides what what universities can get access to this data and what who can't is going to maybe still remain quite controversial, perhaps.
Yeah, I think what's really going to be very difficult about this is I think we are at the point where we're talking about government mandated transparency, and one of the real I think downfalls of this, but I think is unavoidable, is that that means we're going to have to fight this fight one jurisdiction at a time. I think that there are proposals in the US that I think are really interesting. I think there's proposals in the EU that are really interesting. I think there's a proposal in the UK that I think has some promise, although I think it also has some flaws. And, but, right, there are huge problems outside of those places that we just don't have anything on the table right now that would address them. And, I think that's going to be something that we just have to keep fighting for.
Well, I just want to go see some of these questions. There's quite a few people who've been commenting. Vaudrey wants to ask how whether the Canadian Ethics Committee contacted you in their inquiries.
Nope, I don't think I've heard from them.
Okay. And George Chaser, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Apologies, George, if I get that wrong. Says researchers need an anti-SLAPP law that forces would-be claimants in court to sue all parties and not just the vulnerable people, as has happened in the Carol Cadwalader case. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but they singled out Carol as an individual. And not everyone, of course, like you said, has that, pro bono legal support, especially depending on where they might be in the world, of course, and their particular position. And I think there are also other vulnerabilities with researchers, perhaps, that maybe don't also exist for, journalists in the same way, the same kind of protections, perhaps, especially in some countries. I think certainly in the UK, the laws around academics are quite different to the laws around journalism. Whereas here, I think there's a lot more protection for, academics under the Constitution. So there may be like small differences with that too. Do you have any comments on that, Georges?
I think it's an interesting idea that I haven't thought about. I mean, I do think, what Carol's going through is just, it's wrong on so many levels. There's no other word for it. It's a moral outrage. That someone is literally being attacked for doing a public service. There are other researchers out there who do, broadly similar work to what I do. But I actually think the more interesting comparison is, what Facebook claims to object to is that I run a browser extension that accesses the Facebook page. Well, so does every password manager, so does Grammarly, for God's sake. And those browser extensions, in terms of what they actually look at on your page, look at significantly more sensitive data than I do. Among other things, I never look at passwords. So I think this is where, I think, sort of forcing platforms who want to go after researchers to at least be more consistent, that maybe has some promise. But I would really need to think about that more to sort of comment intelligently about it.
Okay, no, that's great. And I've really enjoyed talking to you today. This has been so fascinating. I can see there's a lot of interest from our audience, and I really appreciate you coming and joining us today. For the rest of you guys who are watching, I just want to let you know that in 2 weeks, we have Andrea Trelupa on, who is the co-host of the Gaslit Nation podcast, and she was screenwriter for a film called Mr. Jones, which looks at the Holodomor famine in Ukraine and how that was misrepresented and covered up by the New York Times. So it's a shocking film and really emotional and amazing. And we're going to talk to her about, her personal connections to this and, how she uncovered this really fascinating story that was the basis for George Orwell's Animal Farm. So that's going to be another fascinating episode. And I'll see you again then. Please subscribe so you don't miss it. Okay, thank you so much, Laura. It was so nice.
Bye.
Bye.
Great to meet you. Bye.